So, what in your life has happened that has showed you like how the world doesn't really understand you or ADHD? Um, if you could put that in the comment, that would be really great. Um, I have a few ideas what I feel like the world gets wrong about ADHD. And of course, the first one is that it's a willpower problem when it's really a biologically based condition. Um, Amanda says that they are not forgiving when you forget things. Oh, yes. I think that is a huge problem that they think that somehow the forgetfulness is on purpose and there's not a kind of kindness or compassion toward you because you forget things. Angie says people think that we are just hyperactive or stupid or lazy. They don't get that we just need a different way to understand concepts. I agree. I like to think of people with ADHD as outside the box thinkers or alternative learners. And I think that can really help in terms of not only how you see your brain, but how other people see that brain. Tracy says another thing the world gets wrong is just try harder. Yes, they believe it's a motivational issue rather than a biological issue. Gail says the world is clueless. Yes, in some ways, I think it is. So I think one of the things that the world gets wrong is that this is a biologically based condition, and believe me, if you could do differently or do better, you would. And often you try hard. You're trying all the time to make things better. And so I think that people don't really see how much people with ADHD are trying. Angie, yes, we try so hard and people think we're not trying at all. The inconsistency, yes. So people don't really understand the inconsistency of it and they think that that's just, part of your personality rather than you yourself would probably like to have more predictability and consistency and you can't. Gail says the world has zero tolerance for lateness. Yes, the world is not super tolerant for lateness, and people tend to feel like when you're late, it's because you don't care about them rather than, you have trouble with time management. I personally have trouble with time management because I think I can always squeeze more into a given amount of time than I can, or I underestimate how long something's going to take. And so I think that not understanding lateness and struggling with time management is really hard in today's world. Carolina, assuming kids should act on age like classmates. Right. So what a lot of times the world doesn't understand is that there's an up to 3-year delay in the maturation of the ADHD brain. It's not that the organs are maturing, it's that the connections from the prefrontal cortex, where the executive functioning skills are, to the rest of the brain are maturing more slowly. And they just need more time to make those connections. And so they don't, people will look at kids with ADHD or kids who are on the spectrum or TUI or LD kids, and they'll think, well, you look the same as your peers. Why don't you act the same? Instead of understanding that what's happening inside is not necessarily what you see on the outside. Amanda says they need to know we are a different neurotype. That's right. And just like there's gender diversity and racial diversity and religious diversity and ethnic diversity, there's also neurodiversity. And I wish we could think about it that way because everybody has their own little quirks about how their brain works. And I think that if we had more of a plurality in how we approach neurodiversity, it would be less stigmatizing for the people who live with brains that are wired differently. So thank you for your comments and please keep sending them. So one thing the world needs to know is that it's not a willpower problem, that it's a biologically based condition that has to do with smaller structures of the brain, sometimes the amygdala or the hippocampus, which is the seat of memory. Right here, the right anterior frontal gyrus. This has part of the executive functioning skills. The corpus callosum, which has to do with integrating details and helping the left and right brains work together. So these are structures, among others, that may be smaller in ADHD brains, and so people don't really understand that it's not something you can necessarily help, that you learn the skills to manage your ADHD over time. Tracy says, speaking fast is something you can control. Stop doing on command. I see. So people think that you could just speak slower if you wanted. And that may be true or may not be true. I mean, impulse control is challenging for all of us. Gemma says, my son's dad and I are separated, and my son has finally been diagnosed with ADHD. He can behave so differently with his dad and can be horrendous for me. I've tried to explain the whole safe place person um, or the Coke bottle effect. Can you clarify this? I'm tired of battling him as well. Yes. So, Amanda, that first of all, Angie, I want to just take your question because I want to make sure, Facebook sometimes erases the question, so I'm just copying it to make sure I can get to it. Let me answer your question, Amanda. So, Gemma, excuse me. So Gemma, one of the things that happens, and this does not have to do with ADHD, but this has to do with um, child development and trauma, is that kids will often act out towards the people that they feel very connected or attached to because they feel safe. One of my clients said, "Well, my parents aren't going to divorce me." Right. And so my parents can't, kick me out of school, kick me out of the family. And so there's a sense like I have to hold it together so much everywhere else. And when I come home, I'm going to act it out because I feel like I feel safe, or I know you're going to be more accepting than other people. And that's very difficult. And so what we want to try to do for kids who struggle this way is to set some parameters around what's okay behavior and what's not okay behavior in advance of the not okay behavior, to plan that it's going to occur instead of being surprised every time it does. And what are some consequences that you agree would be fair, and ask your kids about this, because kids often are much stricter in what they think are reasonable consequences than what we might come up with. So we want to kind of come up with a way for kids not, what's okay and what's not okay in the family, but also to teach kids how to self-soothe. When kids with ADHD are dysregulated, it's because they don't know what else to do. They're showing you with their bodies or their words how out of control they feel inside. And so we want to come up with a plan around that where we expect that that's going to happen instead of being surprised, and one that promotes safety. Thank you, Gemma. That's a great question. Angie asks, how can we deal with people, coaches, teachers, bosses who don't understand or believe what we are going through? Tired of hearing I'm not trying or making excuses. I think one of the best things you can do, Angie, in those situations is education. Maybe there's an article or two from Adhd that you can send to them about ADHD. I think a lot of bosses, coaches, teachers are just ill-informed, or, frankly, ignorant about ADHD and how it works. Or they think you take medication and that will magically make your issues go away. And it doesn't work that way. Medications for ADHD make you more available to learn those critical executive functioning skills. And everybody has executive functioning strengths and challenges. I've spoken here before about how I'm not so great with emotional control and maybe some time management, but the other of my skills are pretty well intact. And for a lot of people with ADHD, it's the reverse. There are a couple of few skills that they're really solid on, and then a lot that need a lot of support and shoring up. And so we want to try to talk to people about how, what helps you is scaffolding and structure and support, and you're working on that. And are you working on that? I assume you are. And maybe offering them some things that would be supportive towards you that are very specific, because a lot of people don't understand and they don't know what to do. Zoe says the assumption that you can be top of the class and have ADHD. Oh, you can't be top of the class and have ADHD. Right. So you can't be smart if you have ADHD, which is just ridiculous, because ADHD and learning disabilities and autism spectrum disorder level 1 have nothing, zero, to do with intelligence. Anxiety, nothing to do with anxiety, with intelligence. So what I think that it's important to say is that you can be smart and still struggle. And then that's one of the really great challenges for 2E kids and adults, which is like you have superior intelligence and lagging skills in other areas. And so there's this constant internal discrepancy and performance discrepancy. Angie said, God, I wish it was that simple. I know it doesn't, it sounds like I'm trying to simplify, and I'm not. But I do think if you can narrow down one executive functioning skill that you're working on at work or with a coach or with a teacher, that you can decide that that's the thing that you're going to improve immediately, or pay the most attention to, and then they see progress in that one area, it might help spread to other areas. Deborah asks, is anger part of ADHD? Well, everybody who's a human being has anger. It's just that a lot of people with ADHD struggle with emotional control. And that means that, what happens is we have this tidal wave of emotion, and bam, suddenly we're just trying to like swim with our head above water. Or some kids have described to me it's like a volcano bubbling up inside with little spurts that come out here and there. So it's the combination of having these intense emotions that aren't particularly regulated well by your executive functioning skills, and the lack of impulse control around dealing with those emotions. Okay. Jenny, I wish more people knew about rejection sensitivity. I wish they did too, Jenny. I think rejection sensitivity is such a key part, particularly for women, of having ADHD. And we've done an episode on rejection sensitivity last year, and I know we're going to get to it again this year because it's so important. I think that people don't understand what rejection sensitivity dysphoria is, and they kind of think, you're being a child, or you should get over it. And I wish I agree. And I think the best thing is, like, give them an article. There's lots of great articles on Adhd about rejection sensitivity. That doesn't mean they're going to treat you any better. The other thing is for you actually to hold your own rejection sensitivity gingerly and kindly, so that you can try to set up some boundaries and some ways to soothe yourself or talk to yourself when you're struggling, or have some friends who are some regular supports, or a coach or a therapist. Adults do that as well, yes. Molly, my husband has ADD, diagnosed as an adult. When we found out about rejection sensitivity, our marriage changed immensely. That's fantastic. Thank you. Maybe Molly, put up a comment about how it changed or what you did that made it change. You're welcome, Gemma. Can you offer some insight as to why ADHD often doesn't show up in girls until middle school, but a diagnosis at a younger age could be beneficial considering the effects on their middle school experience? What are earlier signs for ADHD in girls at an elementary school age when hyperactive is not a factor? Yes, I can talk about that. So ADHD shows up often in girls in middle school because many girls who struggle with ADHD are inattentive. And we see in boys at a younger age hyperactive, impulsive. So they command more attention from teachers or parents or physicians. Um, um, for girls, they're able to their intelligence is able to cover for their lagging executive functioning skills until middle school, when they cannot manage all of the shifting, the flexibility that's needed, the organization, the planning, the prioritizing, the working memory, the time management, being able to initiate things on their own and complete them. And so all of the executive functioning skills that really come into play in middle and high school just highlight some challenges that they've had all along, but they may not have been noticed. And so when we want to look for signs for ADHD in girls at an elementary school age, we want to look for, are they dreamy? Are they do they struggle with managing big feelings? Do they have trouble with timeliness? What are their peer relationships like? Do they have a lot of anxiety? A lot of times girls in elementary school are referred for anxiety or depression when the real issue is ADHD. There's lots of comments, so I'm going to keep going. Carolina says, my son is in junior high and totally lost on the concept of having a girl who is a friend and a girlfriend. His girlfriend asked a boy out and he thinks they're not friends anymore. Oh, maybe we should do a whole session on middle school social relationships. I think that would be a great thing to do. What happens in middle school is so complicated. And for a lot of kids with ADHD and many kids who are level 1 on the autism spectrum, they're able to sort of mask some of their social challenges in elementary school by mimicking or copying what other people say, or sort of camouflaging and blending in. But then when they get to middle school and high school, um, or junior high, the pressures are different. The social situations are more nuanced. And so this is exactly the kind of thing that would be so hard for a kid with ADHD. Can I have a friend who's a girl? Can I have a girlfriend? What's the difference? How do things change? They just don't understand how it works. And partially because that part of them is just a little bit younger, hasn't quite kicked in, but socially they're in the mix of kids where it's kicked in fully. And so what we want to try to do with kids is explain how social situations work. You know, the difference between a best friend and a buddy and a good friend and an acquaintance, or somebody you just say hi to. How you can actually be friends with someone and have a girlfriend and they don't cancel each other out. Gemma, when they bottle up everything from the moment they wake up, such as eat your breakfast, that's a little shake of the bottle, brush your teeth, another shake, put your shoes on, etc. And by the time he comes home from school, the lid has got to pop off and everything erupts where he suppressed everything all day. Hope that makes sense. Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. A lot of kids with ADHD work so hard to hold everything together during the day, and they come home and then they just let it go. They can't do it anymore. I had a boy who I worked with who would come home, and his mom said that he would get home from school. He was like maybe 8, and he would literally roll around the kitchen floor, and she would be beside herself. She's trying to get dinner ready, trying to feed the cat and manage the other child. So we decided to institute, and he would call this flippy floppy time. So we decided to institute family flippy floppy time. Everyone did not have to roll on the floor. We'd come home, and for 5 minutes, people would do something that would help them arrive. He rolled around. Mom sat on the couch and just did a little meditation app. The middle school daughter sat on the couch and just played with her phone, listened to music. So all of these things helped. So I missed a few more things, but Molly says you slowly grow out of ADHD as you age. Yes, that was on my list as well. It's a childhood issue that will be outgrown. Only 5 to 10% of kids who are diagnosed with ADHD actually outgrow it, and the research on that is really interesting because we don't have as robust measures to sort of understand and assess adult ADHD as we do for kids. So it's possible the kids outgrow it. It's possible that they learn the tools they need so they don't really require medication or the same kind of support, or they may have outgrown it. Tracy, how do I convince my daughter she is not broken but needs help to teach her the skills she's just lacking in? So I think that's the issue, the $24 million question, right? How do we all convince ourselves, adults and kids who live with ADHD, that you're not broken, but you need skills? And the only way we can do that is through explaining how ADHD works. All people have executive functioning skills. People with ADHD have more challenges than people who don't, and they need more support. And that's why kids need accommodations at school, and they really benefit from having informed and educated teachers. Hi, Lynn. Angie, no, I mean the talking fast. I wish it was as simple to stop. Yes, it is. It's hard to stop when you talk fast. I'm a fast talker, I know. Let's see. Where a Coke bottle effect. When you present as calm, keeping emotions and feelings in, and when you return home, you'll explode, just like you've taken off the lid of a shaken Coke bottle. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Okay, great. Oh, lots of comments. Hold on, let me get to them. Angie, meds help a lot, but I can't help interrupting. LOL. I can't do it all. No. So, one of the things that would help is if you could pick the thing that you want to work on. People can really only change one thing at a time. My husband is always, asked me to do this, that, or the other. I'm like, one thing. I'll work on that for a month, and then we can see how it's going. Okay. Amy, natural maskers, and also people expected to be just boys so that girls diagnosed later. That's exactly right. Gemma, I'm sure my son also has ODD. I've heard it can run alongside ADHD. Also, does anyone else struggle with their person who has ADHD struggle with them lying? Yes, that's very common, and we can do a session on dealing with defiance and lying again. Yes, ODD travels with ADHD, and that has to do with emotional control, emotional regulation, and poor impulse control. 40% of kids with ADHD have a coexisting diagnosis of ODD. Angie. Plus, we are not just chatty running around the class, lol, and if we aren't failing, we must not have ADHD. Exactly. That's one of the major misconceptions. Susan got through high school, easily till high school, and then was struggling. Okay. Yes, please. I think that's on the social anxiety, Carolina, but I'm not sure. Can you let me know? Angie, same. I did well, and then you failed hard. Amanda, I believe that belief systems need to be looked at in order to accept our neurodiversity. We are different and can be a great asset to a team. Absolutely. People who are neurodiverse are naturally outside the box thinkers and creative thinkers. Who wouldn't want those people on a team? Carolina, my son doesn't know how to mask. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but we do need to, you might want to practice some role plays with him on how to respond when certain things are said or how to ask for time. I'm not sure. That's a good question. I'm not sure. Can I have 5 minutes to think about it? Many kids with ADHD, and particularly those who struggle with processing speed, need a little more time. Megan Ann, my daughter will be 10 and entering middle school next year. I need it all explained to me. She has ADHD and almost ASD. Well, I'm so glad you're here. That's great. Zoe, my 7, nearly 8-year-old girl gets looked at by girls like she is an alien. Fortunately, she's oblivious. I tell her, just go play with the boys, really dreading senior school. Okay, well, a lot will happen between 7 and senior school, and some girls with ADHD, and particularly actually girls who have level 1 ASD, like to play with neurotypical boys. They feel like it's easier for them. They're more understood. Amy, I'm 49 and got diagnosed this year. Congratulations. It was my daughter getting diagnosed that made me realize I was the same. Life makes more sense. That's wonderful. So it's hard to listen when everyone else talks slow. Most YouTube has to be speeded up to be bearable. Right, so you like things at a particular fast rate, and that's fine. It doesn't, you have a faster processor or than other people. That doesn't mean anything's wrong or better about you. It's just different. Okay. Yes, ADHD is in the genetics. 57% or 55% of adults with ADHD have a child with ADHD. And if you have one child with ADHD, there's a 33% chance you're going to have a second child with ADHD. So that's an important thing to remember and to tell your kids. And if you can figure out how there are some ways in which your brain or your partner's brain and your child's brain are similar, that will help normalize their experience. Carla asks, how do I overcome I don't care about homework? You care about home. A lot of kids don't care about homework, and there's, different philosophies about homework. I think when kids don't care about homework, it's that their brain is tired. Oh, your son, you care more about homework than me. That's not true. What I think, of course, that's not true. What I think you want to do is to try to set aside a really kind of set amount of time to work on homework. And if it's not finished, then send it back to the school, and maybe your son needs more accommodations. You don't want to get into these battles with your kids about school. Let their homework be their own. Set homework time aside, break it down into chunks according to how long they can focus, have short little breaks, and then after a certain amount of time, maybe an hour, when they start to just completely fall apart, depending on their age, or maybe it's 20 minutes, you're done, and you send it back to school and let school deal with it. How can you deal with a kid that has accommodations but does not take advantage of them? My son doesn't want help from anyone. He's a freshman this year. Well, why don't people want help? That was on my question. People don't want help because they feel embarrassed that something's wrong with them, right? They will feel like they're ashamed that they're different, and they think they should be able to do it on their own. So I think it's important to, focus on their strengths, those islands of competency that make so much difference, and so that they can feel like there are areas that they manage on their own and manage not only well, but maybe decently, and some areas where they ask for support, but that the places where they ask for support are not outnumbering or at least even with the things that they need help with. Let's see. Validate those feelings. It's a hard world out there, sadly, when people see you as different. I agree, Amy. And we want to validate as much as possible rather than reassure, because reassurance doesn't teach people the skills they need to soothe themselves and encourage themselves in challenging moments. So we don't want to say it'll be okay or that's not such a big deal. What we want to say is you're right to be upset, nervous, or mad about that. That would make sense for anyone in this situation. What can we do to think differently about it or respond differently? Thank you, Annie. Let's see. Marcia or Marcia. People assume that ADHD is acting wild, always hyper, and that's not the case. I agree. People assume that if you have ADHD, you're hyper all the time, and they don't understand inattentive ADHD. So that can be very challenging. I'm just writing that down. So what about the fact that ADHD is overdiagnosed? Does anyone ever say to you, I think ADHD is overdiagnosed and you probably don't have it? Anybody? Also, one thing that I think is really hard is that a lot of people think ADHD is, kind of travels by itself. And ADHD actually always has friends around. And those friends might be learning disabilities, those friends might be anxiety, depression, um, level 1 autism. Those things might be different kinds of, not just reading, writing, and math learning disabilities, but some other types, other kinds of physical challenges. So the point is that ADHD rarely travels alone. And so people think that it's, they want to find out, well, if this is your ADHD, what's the ADHD and what's the other thing, whether it's ODD or something. And I think it's important to remember that, sometimes things get mixed up. It's not always cut and dry, right? Zoe says, for me, I didn't use help in my late teens and 20s because people tried to help me their way. Yes, Zoe, that's fantastic. And they didn't listen to me about what I was actually struggling with. Or they didn't listen to your systems in your brain and try to help your self systems of organization or productivity be more effective. And that's really important. We want to work with what makes sense to you or your kids. Okay, lots of responses. Gretchen, I felt that way when my daughter was diagnosed. Barely any help from school. So, I don't know what it's like in other countries, but I know here in the United States, kids are entitled to support. They're entitled to a 504 plan or an IEP if they have a coexisting learning disability or something else. So I think it's important to find out what sort of services are available and your child is mandated for. Jenny says, they say, don't we all have ADHD nowadays because of computers or something? Okay, so let's just end that right now. What really gets me is when I say like, I work with people living with ADHD and they say, doesn't everyone have a little ADHD? Like, no, because everyone has executive functioning skills and everyone may struggle with some of their executive functioning skills. And yes, people multitask all the time, which affects their ability to focus and concentrate. But that doesn't mean you have ADHD. People who have ADHD have persistent challenges, persistent issues with hyperactivity, impulsivity, inattention, focus, concentration, and a whole bunch of other stuff that are actually, seriously impacting their lives, right? So no, we don't all have a little ADHD. Might we all be a little like over focused on our phones and distracted? Absolutely. Older folks think it's not a thing. I've heard it multiple times, but I've never heard it said to me directly. Well, that's good, Kaylee. Cassandra, it was in the past, but they have since strengthened the diagnosis criteria. Right. And that's important to remember. The diagnosis, which was given out much more freely 20 years ago, is actually much more rigid now. The requirements are more rigid, and I think people are more cautious about, you know, making sure that kids and adults are meeting the criteria. The problem is that there have been a lot of articles written that dismiss it altogether or say it's a big pharma conspiracy. I've tried so hard to give people solid information and prove that it's a real disorder that negatively affects people in all of the important aspects of life. Good for you, Cassandra, and it is an uphill battle. That's why we're all so grateful to Adhd. Yay! And this month, of course, is ADHD Awareness Month, which is why we're having this conversation right now. Because I would like you this month to take pride in the different brain you have, in whatever strengths and challenges you have, but to take pride in you being you, because you bring your unique talents to this world. And I know, as someone who's here every Friday with you all, how wonderful that is. I feel blessed always to engage with you. The reason why more children, young people, and adults are being diagnosed is because it's more recognized. That's exactly right, Amanda. Dale, that was me, didn't get diagnosed till you were 58. Wow. Susan, ADHD, that's the hyper little boy thing, right? Wrong. Well, it is right for some cases, but not for many. And particularly boys who have inattentive ADHD are often overlooked completely because they don't fit the model of hyperactive boys, and because they're not, you know, they don't sort of fit the model of ADHD in girls, so they're just overlooked. And that can be very problematic. Kaylee, since I've been diagnosed since I was 8, and yet it wasn't until I got to college that I was informed that I was able to get accommodations in school. Ugh. That's one thing that I think is really terrible and important, that until the age of 18 here in the United States, schools are mandated under the IDEA to provide services. After the age of 18, excuse me, when you go to college or vocational school, your services are now covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I have a client who was talking to the accommodations office at her college this week, the officer, and the officer was like, well, you know, this doesn't really sound like it. I'm not sure I can give you an accommodation for that. And so finally, my client's like, I'm overwhelmed all the time. I struggle to plan and prioritize and organize and get things done. I need the accommodation. And then the woman was like, oh, you're overwhelmed? Well, we can give you an accommodation then. It was so stressful for this person, and unnecessarily so. In Texas, I have found you have to fight for accommodations in schools and follow up to ensure they are followed. Yes, Liza, I've heard that as well. ADHD can look like laziness too. It can, but it's not about laziness. It's about not having enough dopamine to push yourself to do something that seems uninteresting or unpleasant. Angie, a little ADD. Ha, yeah, that's not ADHD, bro. That's called distracted. Amen, Angie. I'm now facing the very narrow limitations on the accommodations that can be made in my university. Right, and so you need to really access the Office of Student Disabilities because you have ADHD, you have a diagnosis, and you should have accommodations. And that sounds like you're not getting treated. So I hope you have an advisor who can advocate for you, and if not, I would encourage going outside of the system and bringing somebody in to help you. Ah, this is interesting. Meds are just legalized meth. Wow, I have not heard of that. That's interesting. Okay, well, we know that that's wrong, and I'm sorry people think that, but methamphetamines and a stimulant are very different. Marcia, he doesn't look like he has ADHD. Oh my gosh, that is just the worst. I've heard that too. Well, it doesn't look like he has ADHD. He seems to be really smart and he's doing okay in some subjects. Of course, he's okay in the subjects that interest him or that are easy for him, and he's struggling in the ones that aren't. Dale, I'm not broken, I'm special. You bet. Angie, yeah, I get extended test time. That's it. It's better than nothing. My client just got extended time on her papers, so she gets a little bit extra time on her papers and gets extended test time. Jess, hi. My two sons, 8 and 13, were both diagnosed with ADHD this summer. My oldest was diagnosed because he is inattentive. We are homeschooling this year and are working hard to understand the way each child learns. In addition to breaking lessons or information into smaller chunks, offering a lot of breaks, and asking for their input about how they enjoy learning, and providing lots of outdoor time, do you have suggestions for resources that we as parents can use to help our children learn? Yes, that's a good question. And Annie, if you can put some resources up, that would be great. Adhd does have resources for homeschoolers. I think that the things that you're implementing already make sense. You might want to consider basically deciding like which subjects are easy for them and which subjects are medium and which subjects are hard, and then talk with them about the order in which they'd like to approach their studies, because they might want to do the easy thing first and get in a roll and then do the hard thing, or they may want to do the hard thing in the morning when their brain is the freshest. So that would be useful. Claire, I was diagnosed with ADHD at 40 after years of being treated for depression and an eventual breakdown. I'm so glad you got diagnosed and I hope you're doing better. Robert, I wish you could be on mainstream media. Thank you so much. Invite me and I'll come. You'd be such a great advocate for us. It's ADHD Awareness Month, and I haven't seen a single thing on British television. I live in Scotland. There is such a lack of awareness. Man, I am so sorry to hear that, Robert, and set it up and I'll come. Carol, Robert, you might want to look into Addis, ADDISS. It's run by my friend Andrea Bilbao, and it's fantastic, and it's a great organization based in London. Yeah, you can get that too, but it doesn't come close to the challenge you experience. So I think the more support that you can have to articulate that challenge, and then trying to get somebody outside of the college to make them give you the accommodations could be useful, particularly someone from the disabilities world. Does menopause have a big thing to do with ADHD symptoms to reappear? Yes. In fact, I once went to this conference with Russell Barkley many years ago, and he said any woman who's in perimenopause, it's basically like going through a mini ADHD period. Gretchen, I asked for 504 IEP evaluation, and the school wanted to start with a school support system, which was a few staff had a meeting. Okay, well that didn't work, so go back and ask for more. Also, if you live in the United States, you might want to get an advocate. It's highly worth the money, or if you have a therapist who's working with you or a coach, anybody you can bring to a meeting to advocate and tell the educators what they should be doing is very useful. The office is the problem. I see. Is there an office, Carol, in your town, or a greater office above the one at the school that you could advocate? John, diagnosed since age 8, spent most of my life in ADHD denial due to internalized ableism. Turning 40 next month and finally starting to understand. I'm so glad to hear that. I think all of us, everybody, has internalized ableism or prejudices that we deal with. Mom acted ADHD forever and then hit menopause and got diagnosed bipolar. Makes me worry. Well, sometimes, ADHD and bipolar often travel in the same spectrum, and she may be bipolar, or she may just have very serious ADHD. And if you're being treated for your ADHD, take a deep breath. It's a different time, and hopefully it'll be a different outcome for you. Cassandra, all parents with ADHD should bookmark this amazing letter. It covers all of the law that tells you what your child is entitled to. That is fantastic. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to put it make sure that that everybody gets a copy of that. I also want to share with you that I have a downloadable about shame and how you can overcome being embarrassed about who you are, that I think is a perfect thing for this kickoff for ADHD Awareness Month. So I'm just going to post that downloadable for you. Marcia, my son was, or Marcia, my son was diagnosed 4 years ago at age 8. I'm 45 and see so much of myself in him. Again, you may share characteristics. You yourself may have ADHD, but I think it's important to, whether or not you have the label, or if you share the executive functioning skill challenges, or you have executive functioning skill challenges, which of course you must if you're a human being, then you can work together in a parallel process with your kids and say, well, I'm going to work on this issue, or you can work on this issue, or that he chooses, or you can each choose something for the other person. You can go either way about it. Angie, I have psychiatrists throw out my previous ADHD diagnosis and try to label the problem as other things without a full or proper assessment. I wonder if this is part of the issue. Yes, Carol, that's a very good point. Perhaps your mother was not assessed for ADHD, had a psychological evaluation, a neuropsych or something. That would be helpful. So a problem I had with extended time for dyslexia, it doesn't really accommodate for getting bored and walking out. The extra time for ADHD needs to be for ADHD possibly needs to include movement breaks. Agreed. Faye, I was diagnosed as a mature adult with ADHD, and it answered a lot of my questions. Why do I do the things I do? I wish there was more information out there to the school system. Teachers should have it in their education at university. I've done lots of research to help me, but not everyone is willing to do that. That's true. Thank you, Annie, for that article. Thank you for the link to Addis. Tracy, my daughter has accommodations, but the school keeps saying, but the teachers already do this for all students. No. No. Whether the teachers do that for all students or not, if your daughter is still struggling in the classroom, then the accommodations are not sufficient. And I think one of the things that's really important is sometimes I feel like, there are a lot of schools are tired of dealing with parents of kids with ADHD. And so they're like, yeah, we do this already. No, you have rights. Make sure you find out what your rights are. And thank you so much for the person who posted that link. Angie, she got severely depressed. Bipolar makes sense, but it makes me wonder. Marcia, rejection sensitivity, is that what it's called? I'm not sure what the question is. Yes, it is. It's called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, RSD. That is so true. Robert, I'm in England and people do not have any awareness or understanding. My son is just going through neurodevelopmental assessment. And it looks like he has ADHD too. Yeah, so I would really check out Addis. I think they do an incredible job, and Andrea is a wonderful person. Angie, I've lived in China. The psych told me that I don't seem to have it, only my kids do. I don't know what to say about that. Let's see. My son has ADHD, ASD, and ODD. ODD is horrific. So ODD can be treated when it comes along with ADHD and ASD. And actually research has shown that if kids who are on the autism spectrum but don't meet the full criteria for ADHD, or those who do meet the full criteria, that taking medications for ADHD can reduce the symptoms of ASD, and it can also reduce the symptoms of ODD. And along with family therapy or parental education or instruction, ODD in this way can improve within 2 years. Cassandra, I've been diagnosed for years and I still struggle to get some of my family to understand my limitations as they relate to ADHD. I actually just said that if my disability were physical and visible, people would be more understanding. Yes, I think that's totally true. ODD is very difficult to deal with. My son is being investigated for this. Thank you, Claire. So I think that ODD is also like it has to do with impulse, poor impulse control and emotional dysregulation, but it's also a relationship problem. Some of the ways in which people are responding to your son, including you, maybe maybe heightening the response instead of lowering the response, and that's why family therapy or parent or family education or parent education is so useful for treating ODD. Thank you, Annie, for that resource. Annabelle, I didn't struggle academically, but the anxiety I had was horrific. Yes, so anxiety is a very good friend of ADHD. It travels around. And we have talked about that before, and maybe we'll do that again this year. Annabelle, RSD is the worst part of ADHD. I see this in so many kids. Yes, right. And so part of that rejection sensitivity comes from feeling like they don't measure up. It's that shame, which is why I share that with you. Tracy, from first to third grade, I begged the public school to help me get the process to get a diagnosis or help. They did not tell me that I needed a private assessment. I finally got one when my son was 9. By that time, I moved into a private school that really worked for him. I never received an IEP because he was doing well. The school closed last year. Ugh. He's in online school. I asked for current accommodations. Are private schools mandated to do IEPs? What's the best way to get accommodations now or later in university? So private schools are not mandated to follow the IEP, but they are held accountable in some way. And you absolutely want to make sure that before your son goes to university that he has another round of testing so that the report is there and that you can ask for accommodations at the university. We have so many comments. I'm not sure I'm going to get to them because it's now 4:50. I'll take a couple more and then we'll come back to this topic, obviously. I like the idea of working alongside your kids as you work on your issues. My daughter and I struggle with impulse, especially when the two of us are in conflict with each other. Here on that one. Any suggestions of how we can both work together on our impulse control? I talk about this in my book, but you want to use stop, think, act. So you want to call a pause in the action for 10 to 15 minutes until your system can calm down. Then get together, and I would use reflective listening. You ask her what she thinks is going on. She tells you, and you say, what I heard you say is this. Did I get that right? Is there anything else? And you do that for 10 minutes or 5 minutes, and then you switch. And then you say, what are we going to do to move forward? Okay. Marcia, my son is ADHD and 11. He comes home often upset because of how other kids treat him. One instance, friend was calling him inappropriate names. I've tried to get an adult at school. When scenarios like this, he refuses to tell anyone, so he's not a tattletale. Yeah, I would go into school and have a meeting with your son and some caring adult in the school with whom he feels safe and create a couple safety plans. He doesn't have to tell on anyone, but he needs to have some outs, some escape plans. And I'll take one more question. Let's see. I love how you all can communicate with each other. It's so fantastic. I wish I had more support, Annabelle says, from the ADHD community, but most people struggle with me as I don't medicate and don't want to, and they probably have some judgment about that. Not everybody can take medication. And I think the thing that you want to say is that, pills don't teach skills. I am working on learning the skills I need to live effectively and with satisfaction as an adult with ADHD and to help my kids with ADHD do the same. Thank you, everybody, so much. Wow, what a great session this has been. I really appreciate it. Annabelle, I encourage you to keep coming here to get the support you need and to check out the Adhd seminars. Again, I'm going to post my free downloadable on shame so that you can work on overcoming your shame and kick this month off with pride. Thank you so much for joining me. We will see you next week at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and whatever time that is where you live. Take care and happy ADHD Awareness Month. See you soon.